Okay, so welcome back to day 2. We're going to continue with our exploration of the tools for contributors. So I'm selecting tools for contributors in the Dojo. Okay. So for anybody new to open source, what you'll find is we use the sort of open and free version of all the tools that we can. And that's so that the artifacts that come out of the tools are then visible and usable by everybody in the community. So the one exception is PowerPoint. So when we do use PowerPoint for our webinars and things, but it's quite widely available. So that's our one exception. So I'm going to go through some of the tools that we use. Actually, there's one missing here that is pretty important for us. Which I will add into the discussion. So I'm going to start with documentation, then I'll talk a little bit about the more developer-oriented tools that we have. And there's two tools that are important for documentation. The first is something called Markdown. And that's what all of these pages are created with. So I'm going to show you all the descriptions of the tools. So hopefully, let me make this bigger. Zoom. I'm sure we can zoom IntelliJ in. Let's just try. Is IntelliJ readable to you? Or is it too small?
I think it's a bit small on the left and the middle.
Right, okay. It must have zoom. There it is. Oh, I see. That's a bit better. Is that better? Oh, I see. It's almost like it did it on a per panel basis. So let's shut some panels down. I'm gonna have to close the chat. Shut that panel down. Okay, so it's made. So when you work with Markdown, so this is a Markdown file that I'm showing here. It's not the same one that we're actually displaying, but what's nice about Markdown is that it's very simple. So this little hash here gives us a heading, so the other nice thing is that in IntelliJ, it shows you not only what you're typing, but also a view of it. And this button up here means that you can switch between the different, the different views and just see what the output. You can see both, and you can see the actual text. So let's see if I can make this a bit bigger. No, it's a toggle. So it's not going to, all it did was make the window bigger. So I don't know how to make, it's a bit surprising that you can't make that text bigger. Oh well. So yeah, so there are different commands, and actually if we go to this picture here, one of the things that is nice about Markdown is that there are an awful lot of education material on Markdown, but this comes from GitHub, and to me it's the it's such a simple and useful sort of cheat sheet, and so this is the one that I use when I'm working with Markdown. What else have we got? Oh yeah, so the other thing is that when we see the Markdown files in IntelliJ, you'll see that they all have .md, the .md files, and that's the Markdown file. So this one is task building Egeria in IntelliJ.md. The one that we're looking at is this Markdown file. This is the description. This is the content for this particular page that we're working through. So we can do links, and we can also introduce pictures as well. And let's see, so Docker, if you remember the Docker yesterday, there's a simple command to introduce an image into the description, and then hash page width restricts it so it doesn't sort of go too wide over the page. It just stretches it to just fit the page, whatever size display it is. So this is pretty much what we use for most of our documentation. The other thing we use is a tool called Draw.io, and Draw.io is let's see if we can get it up here. Draw.io is its proper name, and that is this is a free drawing tool, and all of the images that you see on our screens are pretty much done with Draw.io. We also use Draw.io as diagrams in the presentations, so that again those drawings are available to anybody. It's free. You can either run it in your browser, but if you're going to do a lot of diagrams, we recommend you get the desktop. And then when you start Draw.io, so let me get a Draw.io window. So this is the sort of empty window that you get. Say I want to open an existing diagram, so let's open the tool. So you'll see all of the diagram source files are called Draw.io. And you can load that, and then you'll see these pictures. So as I say, all of these pictures were done, and what we typically do is put a picture on a tab. So you get a collection of pictures for a particular set of pages, and then the way that you create an image is actually you select the picture that you want. Do export as PNG. We're going to use a small border, and you select the options that you want. This is a typical set that we use. Hit export, and then you can save it to wherever you want. So I'm not going to resave this because it's fine. But if I hit save, it would put it in, and you notice we tend to use sort of lowercase dashes, and that makes it easier to refer to the picture in websites and things like that. So as I say, very nice drawing tool, completely free and perfectly adequate for everything that we needed for the for the project. So that's Draw.io. I don't think there's anything else. You can see very similar demo here in the tools. So we talked about, let's just go back. So we talked about Markdown. We talked about Draw.io. So that's really, so if you're interested in updating and improving our documentation, that's always gratefully received. Markdown for the actual file, Draw.io to build the images, export the images as PNGs, and they all go directly into our project. So this is most of the tool stuff that you've seen are all in this directory here, and so we will update them as the tools improve over time. So that's documentation. So let's have a look. The next one is Git and GitHub, and in the next section you're going to have an opportunity to work with both of these in a lot of detail. Yesterday we talked about the different type of Git repositories we have in the project, we're going to make use of the Egeria guide, but there are also huge amounts of material on the internet around using GitHub. So our guide is a very sort of simple guide to this is how we do it in Egeria, but there are lots of other options that I'm not even going to get close to today. And sometimes when things go wrong, when we clash with each other and things like that, you need more advanced tools, but and much more advanced options on Git. But this is what we're going to cover today, is just enough to get you going. Let's have a little look at the other Git repositories actually. So we go to this one. So at the ODPI, all of our directories are actually under the ODPI organization, so github.com/ODPI. And then there are a series of repositories underneath it. Now the ODPI is a foundation in the Linux Foundation, so it runs a number of projects, and so Egeria is not the only project that ODPI hosts. So Open Data DS for All, Open Data Science for All, is a set of freely available material for university professors to create data science modules and curriculum. So in there are lots of Jupyter notebooks and things to get people started, but it's directly focused at university professors all over the world. So that's a new project, and it's starting up and pretty vibrant. Our data governance project is it has two purposes. One of them is what we call the guidance on governance, and this takes you through how to think about governance in an organization, as well as this is where Cocoa Pharmaceuticals live. So all of the personas, how we're driving what sort of the transformation that they're trying to cover. So the sort of the large scale scenario, the personas themselves. So there are descriptions of each person, what they're trying to achieve themselves, because basically an organization is lots of people trying to achieve their own goals, and the organization tries to align those goals. So that's the piece that the reason we have lots of personas, and then we take you through different scenarios for sort of building the strategy. So this is the sort of people side of governance, and then these descriptions take you down to a point where we drop across into Egeria, into the code project itself. There's also some basic material around what is governance and how you set it up, and there's also a maturity model, because you don't put governance in one go. You gradually work your way through. So this maturity model takes you through sort of just getting started, building a view of your governance, embedding it in your technology, bringing the business in control of it, and then finally what we call data citizenship, which is the final goal for Egeria, is where everybody is collaborating on data using their own tools, and Egeria is managing the bits in between. So this is a picture you may see in a lot of our presentations that is showing where we envision Egeria coming to at the as we mature it. And at the moment, the blue area, the bit that Egeria is sort of the core infrastructure piece, is pretty good. What we're missing are connectors to lots of different tools. And so when you're thinking about contributions, the most valuable thing you can contribute to Egeria is a connector to databases, a connector to ETL engines, a connector to reporting systems, all the different types of tools. Those connectors are gold dust to us at the moment, because they expand out what we can do as a project to an organization when they're starting up. So really, really think about the types of technology you'd like to see in this ecosystem, because that would be tremendous help to us. So that's the data governance. Let's get back to the main list piece. The other thing that we do with this particular repository is we use it for large files. So we're getting there, getting back. There we are. So wherever we have we do workshops, we do just standard presentations at a particular conference. For our webinar material is all here as well. So again, so that you can pick it up. We don't want to put that into the main repository that everybody's downloading, but we wanted to make it publicly available. So that's the other thing that the data governance repository does. So that's that one. Then we have specific repositories for particular ecosystems. So this one is for the Hadoop ecosystem. At the moment, we have a connector for Atlas and a connector for Ranger. Very happy for more to come. For example, Hive, the Hive Metastore would be really useful. But you know, that's the sort of thing that so basically, if you're working with Hadoop, you would bring down the connectors in here and connect them to Egeria through the configuration. So that's Hadoop. We've got information server. So this has a couple of connectors in it, one for the governance catalog and one for data stage, so that we can pull in lineage from data stage. The TSC is the governing body of the project, the technical governing body. So stands for the Technical Steering Committee. And that group has monthly meetings, and we go through the status of each of the projects in those monthly meetings. And everything is minuted, and that belongs in that particular repository. Artwork, this is all the pretty stuff. So these are the all the licenses and logos and things for each of the projects. So you can see here's the Egeria logo, and those appear all over the place, and again they're free to use for anybody who's interested. So that's the logos, and this is a you can see this thing here shows that the life of this looks like it's dead. It's actually stillborn. It's a project. It's a new repository that I'm planning to put in projects for developers. At the moment, it's empty. Again, that's an area we're looking for contributions in. Palisade is an open source project around advanced access control, and we're working together to create examples of where having a metadata repository with the Palisade capability actually gives you a really complete and robust implementation, particularly where you want to include evaluation of the project's purpose against the data that you're accessing. So this is a very interesting research project that we're doing. This is some of our background stuff. BI and AI is another ODPI project. And then we get into the older stuff, which is the ODPI's history, which was around creating standards across different Hadoop infrastructure. So the most active ones, of course, at the top of the list, and those are the ones that you see. We have most of those are actually the Egeria repositories. So I need to go and find my way back to the Dojo. There we are. Oops. Back into day 2. Day 2. Tools for contributors. This is where we are. So we talked a bit about Git and GitHub. The other one is IntelliJ, and again, this is a free IDE. It comes from JetBrains. They have more advanced. They have a community edition and then more advanced editions. And we just use a community edition. Although if you're working with the Spring area, then the advanced ones is nice to use. And we're going to actually work with IntelliJ this afternoon. So if you don't have IntelliJ running, it's a good idea to think about downloading that. So the next thing is let me just check something. Yeah, let's look at Maven. Now Maven, I noticed this morning, there's a little bit of a bug on this page, and I've got a pull request waiting to go in, but it's not ready to go. But Maven is our build tool, and to completely rebuild the project, as you'll do later on today, it's Maven clean install. And when we look at, so Egeria has, it's a big project, right? So let me get rid of this. It's a very big project. And this is the list of all of the Maven projects here. And it's look at that. So as you can see, it's a lot of modules. It's highly modularized because different vendors will take different subsets of the code, and it needs to operate independently. But this is what, and actually it takes, on my machine, it takes about 15 minutes to build it. And that's because there's so many modules and there's so much going on in the build. But over time, you'll get used to the names of them and the projects there. So we use Maven behind the scenes, and in the project context, what you'll see, if we go right to the top of, you see this file called pom.xml, and the Pom file is the control file for Maven. And at the top level one, it basically says this is going to build Egeria. That's the thing we build, which is the artifact. And then there's lots of control information about the versions of the dependencies we're managing, all details of all the modules, the versions that they build to. Keep going. We have things like how we handle we've got a lot of tools running during the build to look for issues in the code, checking that Javadoc still builds, all that sort of thing. So we're doing a lot more than just compiling the code in our project. And then as we go into code modules, let's pick. So the code is in implementation. So let me close this down. So the main repositories are the conformance test suite. Distribution is where the install image is built. Implementation, that's where the code is. Publications, the website. Resources are things like the tutorials that we've been playing with. And tests, we'll talk a little bit about later on for that. So, whoops, we're going into implementation. So in implementation, this is the hierarchy of the code, all those modules. There's a Pom file at each level that says, this is what I'm going to build. And so this list here is the modules represented in each of these structures. So we go into frameworks. Underneath frameworks is a Pom file, and it says we're going to build these four. Underneath audit log is a Pom file, and that says how to build the audit log framework. So the build builds up in a hierarchy as we go through. This value here is what you see here. So here we've got audit log framework. So this is the entry for this module here. Yeah, I think that's about it. The dependency list is very important. We spend a lot of time keeping our dependencies under control, and that's firstly to make sure that Egeria will be embeddable in lots of different environments. And the second is that every dependency brings with it security bugs and holes and things. So by keeping the number of dependencies down to a minimum, we reduce our security exposure. And you'll see there's lots of activity going on continuously. We have a thing called Dependabot running with the build, and that's constantly looking for better versions than we're using of each of our dependencies. So that's an ongoing process that the maintainers are running to keep the project up to date. So that is Maven. I think that's most of what we cover. Oh, the other thing to know with Maven is that all the time you're working with code in IntelliJ. So if let me go into the code here. Let's look at this one. Right, if I go in and I change something, it will automatically tell me that's not going to build, and it starts to show it in the hierarchy, which is really nice. And when I because I've made a change, it will rebuild that file and make sure it's okay. And that's really useful while you're typing and working. However, because the build does so much more than compile code, you also need, if I make changes to that, then I would go into the life cycle and do a proper build of that project while I'm working on it. And then just before I go to commit the change, I will do a full build of the entire project, which I'm not going to do just now because it takes a while. But that's the sort of working with Maven.
One other thing on Maven, Mandy, I would suggest is there's an option in IntelliJ to auto-import Maven files when they change. And the reason for that is that IntelliJ has its own concept of a module definition. And basically it creates that off the Maven definition, which is what we have as part of Egeria. And if those two get out of sync, you can get odd behaviors and see things missing or things not working. And I would recommend setting a preference in IntelliJ to say auto-import. It's I think if you go into preferences, do a search for Maven and import in, it's just a little tick box for auto-import. I suspect that's what most of our team are using. And I think probably you are too.
Have we lost Mandy's sound?
Yeah, it sounded. I thought I'd lost my sound. I was playing. Mandy,
Did because I was pouring tea while you were talking.
did I not talk long enough? I'm sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. I forgot. All right. So sorry. So the only other thing I wanted to say is that if you're going in, you're making changes that change the dependencies in Maven. The thing is to read this section on dependency management, which is linked off of the Maven page. And this talks about how you manage dependencies. And this is all about part of our mechanisms for controlling what gets pulled in when the server starts. So there's a lot of detail about how we operate with Maven in that particular document. So that's dependency management. Okay, I think that's Maven done. The next one is Postman, and I don't need to spend very much time on Postman because you spent so much time on it yesterday. But it is an important test tool, particularly when you're building new REST APIs. So most of our modules, let's look at an access service. Let's look at asset owner. Most of our modules have client and a server side. So the clients are for embedding into external projects that are calling us. And the server side is where the REST API calls are done. And they're always done in two parts. The first is the Spring module. And in here are the annotations that says so /asset subtypes. And so the full name is here. That's that full path that you were using yesterday. And then each of the operations have their own extra bits tucked on there. So that's always in the Spring file. And the reason the Spring and the Java that implement it are in separate modules is that in other environments, there's a desire to not use Spring, to basically use another type of REST enablement, such as the micro profile. And so people who want to use that just ignore the Spring module, and they just run with their YAML definition and the server module. So each of these, all of the Spring things that go on in the Spring module is just literally the annotations to say where values come from, and the implementation, I'm going into the implementation here, takes you through to the code that actually does something in the server. And I've now jumped into the server module. So when you're building those two things, Postman is a really good way of validating that the server side works. And then when you bring in the client side, so the clients look very similar to they're just Java versions of the API, really. Let's see if I can find the same method. Here we are, get types of assets, and they issue the REST call to the server. So with Postman, you can check the server side's running, and then then you can run the client. And if they both work, then that's good. It means that the client's consistent with the server, and the server is working itself. So that's the beauty of Postman when you're developing the environment, developing for Egeria. One of the other tools actually you can probably see is that we use Javadoc to document at least all our public. So some modules just document the public interfaces, others will document every single method. It just depends on the owner of that particular module. And in IntelliJ, you build Javadoc off of the tools menu, and you can choose what you want to do. You can do the whole project. You need to fill in the output directory, which is going into, let me put it into a different directory. You can choose how much you put. So if I do the public ones, this might take a little while. This is where you start to realize how big Egeria is when you watch something run. But it is, if you want to understand our APIs and what all the different modules do, it is actually a really useful way to do it. So we've got an issue there's an issue in there which needs to look at. Let's see if it's continuing to go. I think that's just a warning. The good thing about IntelliJ is you could see those errors coming up. It's that the process of cleaning this stuff up, it's an ongoing process, but IntelliJ is constantly telling you there's an issue here, there's an issue here, and it's very exact and very fussy, which is just what you need when it comes to code. It will tell you, it has see these yellow marks here. This is telling you that there's something wrong with the code. So here you can see it says that this access can be packaged private if you wanted to. And actually I do want it public because it's the client interface and we want it to be callable outside of the package. But at the moment it doesn't know of anybody calling it, so it's telling me it could be packaged private. So sometimes the messages are useful. Sometimes that's like, no, I know better than you, it's correct. But always check, because IntelliJ is pretty smart. And does know an awful lot of things about programming. So it's taken out, for me personally, it's taken out some really nasty null pointer exceptions and things that would have been a complete pain in the runtime. And it's just told me while I was typing in, got slight control, problem with the loop or whatever. And it's really, really good at that. So this is still going through. What you can see generating at the moment is we have an FET program that generates code and runs it for every single type in the system. And the generated code is also producing Javadoc, which is great. But it's a big piece of code, and it's one of the things that takes a little while in the build. But it is worth it, because to have that basic validation going on is important. Any there? Any questions on anything I've covered while we watch while we watch IntelliJ produce the Javadoc? There it goes. So here we are. Here's our Javadoc, and as I say, you can look at each of the modules and see the different see what each package does. We're quite consistent, not totally, but quite consistent on the naming convention throughout the packages. It's reasonably well organized in here. So anyhow, that's
it's worth just adding as well that we do run automatic builds. This is both to verify changes, which I think Mandy's going to talk about shortly, but also when we have releases or the regular snapshots, as you were using yesterday, and those get posted to Maven Central amongst other places. So if you're actually integrating with Egeria, you might do that by defining Maven dependencies to build your code against.
Yeah, and we have some special Maven dependencies that we're experimenting with, which are subsets of Egeria for different types of use cases. Again, we were quite interested in whether these are right. So we've got one that packages all the clients, and I'm not sure what that one is, but yeah, they're all designed for different types of use cases, and yeah, we are looking for some feedback on whether those are right. The client one seems pretty obvious, but the different subsets of the server modules is of interest to us.
It's interesting as well, as when you get into the detail of that, you realize that there are some problems. For example, the way we actually have some tests in our build process that verify you don't include dependencies that you're not using, and that you fully specify any dependencies that you are using. And that actually does introspection of the object code using some standard Maven tools, and that means that you have to have an exact match. And so one of the problems with these bundling packages is you wouldn't then have an exact match. So if you were to adopt a Egeria strategy for verifying your Maven build, it actually wouldn't work with this mechanism. So it's a bit of a dilemma. Maven's a bit of a tricky one sometimes.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back to. I'm just gonna. These are updates for the next part of the dojo, so I'm just going to bring those in, and we'll talk about the pull requests in a little while. This is just in time technology development. So where are we? Let's get that. Yeah. Yes. All right. So the last one is a special request from Nigel again. So for most of the time we're using Postman to issue the request calls, but there are also command line alternatives for people who prefer the command line. And the most popular one is curl. Well, the most available is probably the right word, but Nigel also uses HTTPIE as an option, and so we have featured that with our projects. I don't know, Nigel, whether you want to talk a little bit about
it. Click on. Feel free to look at the web page. The bottom line of HTTPIE is it's prettier. So it just does some nice formatting of, for example, a JSON that comes back, and it also makes it easier to pass in the more complex request bodies into the request. Curl is a little bit horrid in that regard. But that's all. So I'd recommend it. It's quite a nice little tool. It's quite available on Mac, Linux, Windows, etc. It'll even do it in nice colors.
Yeah. Well, I noticed you use nice colors when you were doing the Docker Compose. Is that normal, or is that what?
It's pretty normal, but it may depend on your shell and TTY setup and things like that. But it's pretty normal.
Yeah, this should. So I updated this page. There we are. It's updated. So when I hit that pull request, it changed the file in Egeria, and there's a small delay to regenerate the GitHub pages. But here you can now see that it actually has a proper link to HTTP on the page. So yes, so we talked about all the tools. So on the call we had some very experienced developers and things. Is there anything else? This is what we use typically. Is there anything else that we could use that would help us?
Can I just jump in quickly? We didn't mention Java version, did we?
Java version. No, we didn't actually. No, I've got.
Java's quite important.
Is it? Oh,
so we have a minimum level of Java 8, and so everything is built to generate Java 8 code and Java 8 language constructs. But we do run builds with Java 11 as well, so all the code will both build and will execute with Java 11 too, and that's a mandatory check as part of any pull request.
Yeah, so there's the Java information. So it's in developer resources languages, but you're right, it should be in the Dojo. That's a somewhat embarrassing admission. And also the other thing that we do use is Python in the hands-on labs, and that, as Nigel said yesterday, is developing into a very interesting set of client libraries, which we may formalize into our modules. And in the way that our Java clients are formalized as well. So thank you, Nigel. Any more things that I've forgotten to say, or tools that we should be thinking about? So let me go to the full list of tools. We've covered a lot already. So I've talked a little bit about Swagger. So the Swagger documentation we have here actually shows you how to do the annotations in your Spring files to get the documentation come up. And this is a new thing for us. So we have a mixture of modules that are good at that have got the annotations in, and some that don't. But probably in the next few months, all of the modules will pick it up. That seems to be about it when it comes to the tools.